Hello, this is R Rats with Team 4545 League analyzing the game between JWB and VA Knight. This was played in Team Event 53 in Round 6. Also, by the way, Truxton at ICC is also making videos. He's already done one on this, and unfortunately I haven't had a chance to look at it, but he's already done one that I've seen, and he did a great job, and I'm going to put a link to that one in the notes to this. You may compare. Anyway, let's have a look at this one and see what happens. Okay, so knight f3, useful transposition move. Now f5, Dutch defense. And white can do a lot of things here. One is a risky kind of gambit. You can play e4, and then if black wants, he can play the Latvian counter gambit, right? And he could also play the Nimzovich Fred, something I'd be tempted to do, but that's another story. Okay, so anyway, this is a very interesting move. If you're not familiar with it, black should be okay against it, but he can also run into some difficulty. You have to know the lines. That's why we talk about these things in these videos, little tricks and things. Maybe some people know them, some people don't. But I don't remember all the analysis. I know I've played it before, and I can't remember if it's knight g5 or knight e5 or if either one is playable. But you know, just look, knight e5. Look what it threatens. Queen h5 check. Yeah, black's going to see it and defend it, but what the heck? Or you can just play knight g5, and you're going to eventually surround that pawn and win it. And if black tries to hang on to it, you may just gambit something here. Like I say, I don't know the lines. And then this just looks awful shaky. Black's asking for trouble. White could almost just gambit. No, he can't play bishop e2. But let him double the pawns. Just give me some more open lines to go after you. Anyway, something to look at. But white doesn't want any part of that. Maybe he didn't know the lines, or he didn't know they existed. Now he knows, and once he sees this video. Okay, so now I guess we're pretty much going to transpose into a mainline Dutch defense. It's not the Leningrad. It's looking like a stone wall. And just continue with development. So far, so book. And here's where the game starts taking a peculiar course. Black plays c6. He's clearly intending a stone wall, but I believe the correct way to do it is just go directly with d5 and get that done over and done with, because as the game turns out, it just doesn't turn out to a stone wall at all, and we'll try to dissect what actually goes wrong and why. But c6, okay, that's what he plays. It's clearly intending to play the stone wall, but let's just see what happens. Okay, and there's what happens. Boom. And that's a kind of a surprise, and I admire white for making this move, because he's basically saying to black, you've messed up your move order, and what can I do to counter that? And so playing d5 is very clever. I mean, white could, let's face it, white can play castle. He can just castle here and allow the mainline position, but I've got to give him credit here, and I want you guys to think about this too when it's your turn in a situation where somebody plays something a little out of order, to find out, what else can I do here? What else can I do? And you're always asking yourself those questions. What can I do? And you'll never be surprised, or you'll be surprised a lot. There's always a lot you can do. Now, I wouldn't advocate c5, but that's certainly a move to take advantage of this formation, because, okay, I'll explain why. I don't think it's the best move, but the logic is, if black goes to his stone wall anyway, you're going to you take on this square, and there's a difference in the pawn structure. If the pawn's on d5 and white exchanges his c pawn, black is able to take back, say, with his e-pawn, giving himself an open e-file, increasing the scope of this bishop, because he's just got to get that f-pawn out of the way, and it's happily going to push to f4 at some point, right? So, but I don't recommend c5, but black, it gives black a little better than what he might get otherwise. But white doesn't have to be so cooperative after d5. He doesn't have to take en passant, right? give black what he wants. White can go about his business and still do these things, knight e5, and follow up with f4 even, but then he's giving up e4. But that happens. Both sides are giving up the king 5 squares. So c5 just kind of locks up the game, and eventually white would have some pawn breaks with b4 and b5, and maybe require future a4 to support it. But we're not going there. But d5 just begs to be played here because black didn't do it, and so what do we do now? How do we go about picking a move like this? Well, I've just said, kind of given most of it away. I've said, well, if black didn't go there, what happens if I go there? What can I do different? What can I do different? And I showed you something different with c5. But d5 just makes perfectly logical sense because it's just going to mess black up entirely. And black's got this problem in this position right now, and here it is. The queen side is undeveloped. Well, white is kind of in the same boat. He does have his knight out, but black has one little trump over white, and that's that he's castled, and white hasn't. So to some degree, you might say it's a premature attack, but it isn't really because of the positional things it does. It took a square that black will occupy away from him. And that's the whole thing. Black's not getting a pawn on d5 now, period. What can black do? Well, he's got several candidate moves. He can sit and do nothing and let the tension in the center stay there. But to do that, what he has to do is develop his pieces. Now, that bishop is going on c8 is going nowhere, and until he moves a pawn or white cooperates and exchanges some pawns. So what's black going to do? Let's consider some candidate moves. And there's not that many of them. Basically, you're going to be moving one of these pawns or this knight, and let's just consider knight here. Okay, there are more candidate moves than the 3 I just showed, but let's consider this one first. Okay, the first purpose of this move is it's trying to get this knight into play somewhere. Maybe it can go to c5 and then hit e4. Okay, that'd be a dandy way to maneuver it. And if just a fantasy line, if white castles and if we play, oops, we got to watch out for moves like d6. Okay, that just kind of throws the whole thing out. See, I can't see these one movers. I'm just horrible at it. The threat is d6, winning the piece, right? Black's got to deal with that. So, but still, his queenside development is just pathetic here. So what are the candidate moves? Taking on d5, or moving this pawn to stop white from pushing d6. Another possibility might be queen c7. That develops the queen, but that's not normally where we want to put the queen in the Dutch. We want to go to e8 and h5, right? That's the maneuvering strategy with the queen. So also on the d6, we're hoping white does some exchanges, get our pieces developed. We're hoping he does this and get our knight out. And that pawn isn't really that weak. It could be later, but it's no problem right now. Or we hope he takes this way and help us develop our bishop. Although white can kick it, it's really probably not all that useful in the long run. But we've got to get back to the main position. So really it only leaves one other alternative, and this just plays right into white's hands. And the other alternative is just to take on d5, and that's what he does. But let's just back up and check one more time. What else can he do? I mentioned queen c7. The other possibility is just to play bishop b4. But the problem with that is then we've moved the piece twice in the opening, and we don't necessarily want to do that. We've got to get our development ready, and black playing d5 would have done just that. So white takes, and or black takes on d5, and then white retakes. Now the question comes back again: how do we continue? And I think what happened is black just got on a faulty strategy here, and he just kind of lost thread. He attempts now to win a pawn, and he actually does, but it comes at a pretty steep price, as we'll see. He's just completely out of his game plan, He's not losing yet, but his game is certainly difficult because he's not in any kind of position like he's expecting to play. If he's a Dutch player, if you look at 100 games he's played with the Dutch, you're not going to see too many anything close to this. So he's kind of on his own turf. And generally, it's not good to go pawn hunting as black in an opening when your pieces aren't developed, and that's kind of what's going to happen. So really, what black needed to do was go ahead and play d6 and accept either this isolated pawn on d6 and get the development going, or accept some hanging pawns that are going to have to be looked at. Black's okay with these. He can hang on to him. White's not any threat to win him. He can put the queen on c7. He might have to watch out for some tricks at knight b5 if this diagonal opens up, but that's a ways away. The queen doesn't have to rush to c7 just yet. Again, we're now out of the mainline Dutch, so it's okay to try a new strategy. Play this kind of like maybe a Sicilian defense or something. The fact where white has traded something on c6, the knight will have to find a way to get to d7 and find a place for that bishop and so forth. But black should be okay. He's just got to slow play it. But anyway, he didn't play d6. He whoops, hit right button. He starts going for the win of a pawn, and now he's threatening just to play. Knight takes pawn, and white can't retake. So it looks in principle like it's a good move, because what's white going to do? He can black would be happy if white took on c6, because this just kind of eases a lot of the pressure. Black will retake. Now that secures the long diagonal. It's not pressured by the bishop on g2 so much, and black's threatening to trade queens, and black already also has a queenside pawn majority for what it's worth. So let's just suppose white castles here. Black will happily trade his queens, okay, and then he may even just chop this knight off just to split those pawns up, okay, and black should be okay here. The bishop's going to have to find a home. It's got to watch out for some tricks, but you know, we've got this c5 square we're eyeballing. We're controlling e4, so we can get our knights in, and we'll find a way to get that bishop developed eventually, even if it has to stop and go to b7 and just sit there and play a solid game for a while. So black has reasons to be optimistic about it, but white finds a solution. He just says, take the pawn, I don't care, and I'm going to develop. And that's just smart chess. Pawns don't count until the game's down in the ending, and you're in a position where your opponent makes a pass pawn and eventually beats you. That's where a pawn deficit matters. But development means everything in the opening, and white's getting it. So now white's got 3 minor pieces out. Black has 2. Just a little while ago, black was just a half tempo ahead on development, I believe. Now it's the other way around. So, as I say, black plays for the win of a pawn, and it wasn't too late to ignore all this and just play d6 and let bygones be bygones and try and survive. Black can still defend this. White's going to have to prove that he can. If he takes, he's going to have to prove that those hanging pawns are weak, and who's to say they are? You know, bishop f4, we can just play d5. They're still hanging, but this is not an open file. Black has given up the bishop here, but that's not all that important. As I've shown in countless videos, it's overvalued by a lot of league players. But anyway, black just goes about his business and grabs this pawn, and you guys, you just can't take pawns in positions when you're behind in development. You can't. If you get away with it, fine, but let's look at the clock just for a moment. Let's just back up, okay. When he played bishop e7, his clock went up 36 seconds. So he's basically spent 9 seconds selecting this move. He basically, it's impulsive. He sees that it threatens to win a pawn, and he's hoping that White will trade pawns. You know, you're playing hope chess, hoping that your opponent will play a bad move instead of finding a good one, right? And you can't just make decisions like this with this much time on your clock. Whereas logically, as I was saying, d6, just hunker down, take a slightly inferior pawn position and run with it and go from there. You've made a mistake. You've allowed White to do something. Just go from there. So his decision to do this was impulsive, and it's gonna catch up. Okay, so now he goes ahead with his plan, and you know he spent a little more time here, 30 or 41 seconds, but clearly it was his plan all along, and he's just probably making sure there's nothing wrong with it, that missing a one mover or something that'll destroy his game. And again, so 54 to 24, so he spent 15 seconds on that move. It wasn't too late to still go ahead and try d6, although you've lost a useful defender of the pawn. As I've said, it wasn't too late to consider it, but I guess Black wanted no part of that. He wants to win a pawn and hold on. So now it's up to White to justify that giving up a pawn was worth it. And White doesn't have his development complete. That's one thing to be said. White still has his queen, rook, and queen, bishop at home, and you know I talk about those in so many games. How often these guys sit at home for so long, and often they're there forever. I've seen games where they never get out. Well, that happened here. Well, stay tuned. Okay, so White to move. How does he go about getting his pieces developed? Well, let's look at some candidate moves. Bishop g5 tempos the queen, for what it's worth. It makes the queen move somewhere, or makes Black retreat his knight. And if Black retreats his knight, we can stick a queen on d6. You know, just for the fun of it. Let's just say Bishop g5. What are you going to do? Come back with a knight? Well, then I'll just put my queen here, and I've got you tied up in knots. I've got a very good aggressive position, and I'm not going to let you get developed. So that's just a possible line. I'm not saying it's the best line. What other candidate moves there are there? Well, you can play queen b3. Now that has a pin on the knight. It pins the knight so it can't move, and it maybe threatens some tricks with c4, followed by a c5 discovered check, although the knight can return to d5. That it's going back into a pin, right? So let's see what White does. And yes, he does play queen b3. And now it's up to Black to solve this mess he's gotten himself into. And here's the mess. It's right here. It's this lineup right there. And they've got to get in the game quick. Okay? So what's Black going to do? If I'm playing Black here, what am I going to do? Well, I have to consider candidate moves. And one move I've been screaming forever is just to play d6, because that clears a decent square for the knight. Okay? It opens up the line for the bishop. And also in this position, what's wrong with just maybe knight a6? Okay? If we have to be careful, we may not survive that. Knight c5, it tempos the queen, and the queen just goes attacks the knight on a3, and both knights are loose. But you know, just like I say, allow that discovered check. What's White got for it? He doesn't really have a heck of a lot. This pawn is threatened, so let's go pile up on d5. Well, looky here. I've got knight c7. Now the knights are supporting each other. But then again, White has some good moves here. You know, it's complicated. Knight c4. And now the knight wants to hop into d6 and imprison that bishop forever, right? But who knows? You know, Black's still got some counterplay here. He can work on those pawns. Okay, knight d6 doesn't seem to accomplish a whole lot if you can undermine that square. And then now the bishop's finally got a diagonal to get to, and then the rook's got a square to go to. Maybe Black can survive this. It's moves that have to be considered. But when your clock is not even budging and you're gaining time on the increment, you're clearly not planning things. And I said, what would I do if I had Black here? And I said, well, I'd stop and think. I'd start finding candidate moves. So knight a6 is certainly a reasonable try, as any. d6, same ideas. You give the check, and now when the discovered check comes, oh look, you got out of it all. So there, now the problem's solved. Now we have this horrible bishop here, and b7 is pressured, but black is surviving this. White has no direct win. White's going to have to find another plan. So let's see what black does. And he plays king h8. And really, there was no need to. That white never really had anything. But let's, unless he's afraid of some knight g5 motif. And okay, what was I playing? d6. Okay. Well, we're shutting that diagonal gets shut off if c4 and d5 are the knight moves. The moment you push c5, you close the diagonal. So knight g5, well, whoopee. Let's develop a piece, right? Well, you can't play knight there because knight e6. So, well, let's go back to knight a6, okay? Whoops, this is hanging. I got to be careful here. So maybe there was something here that black's afraid of. Let's see. Which makes this queen b3 all the better move for white. Okay, the threat is but that's based on black playing d6. Black can find. I'm trying to find another move other than king h8 because it doesn't develop anything. Well, d6, knight g5 attacks. Well, let's go back to my other plan and support the knights, okay? Remember I had that? Okay, now we got d5 covered. Okay, so here comes the move we were so worried about, right? And we come back, now we let him have the discover check, and hey, we can even bring this knight over if we want. Maybe that's even better. Now does white have anything here? He's not primed for e4. Looks like maybe black's okay. The players will have to evaluate it on their own. I mean, I prefer white here. He's got a nice position. He can develop the bishop on b2, and both knights have to watch out for a bishop taking him at an appropriate time. And these guys are still sitting there at home, not doing anything. So anyway, I don't like king h8. Again, let's look at the clock. Okay, it went down 1 minute and 15 seconds. So he spent 2 minutes on the move. So clearly, if he analyzed knight a6 and knight c7, he didn't analyze it very deeply. But again, now white just has more time to get his guys going. So he brings a rook into play. This is fine. Now just look how the white position is starting to swarm. White still hasn't developed these guys that I talk about so much, but this can develop with tempo almost any time, and then the rooks are connected. Wow, then I say the knight g5 trick can come in and with some stuff on d5, so white's doing fine here. And now I think queen e8 is just completely out of place because it's a thematic move that black wants to play in the Dutch, but we're not in the Dutch anymore. We're in an open position, and there's nothing. It goes there to go to h5, right? And try to pressure h2, but black doesn't have everything to support that. So queen e8. What's he thinking about? You got to go back to these guys. They're screaming to get in the game, and if they're not in the game, game's over. Okay, so. It's true. White has some pressure here, as I said. He can play bishop c5 or g5, and if the knight goes somewhere, we can just come in and support the things and try our best to hold on. But anyway, he didn't. So queen e8, and white's just getting a stronger game here, and just develops another piece with tempo. Boom. Hello, Mr. Rook. If you don't do anything, I'm gonna take you. So black has to deal with that, and now the rook comes into play. So, black centralized. His 3 pieces that are developed are centralized. It looks, in principle, like he's okay, but he's not. White's just got too much pressure here. There's too many open lines that white's gonna seize. And here he goes, c4. It's something we've been talking about for a long time. It finally happens, and was that the best? I don't know. Let's see. Knight e7 can't be. Should come to mind as a possibility. It avoids being tempoed. with c5, right? White's got some squares. He's got some activity here. He can park this bishop on d6, crimp the black position up a little bit. Then he's planning bishop e5 and so forth. White's got a great game still, but I don't know. Knight b6 just says tempo me if you need to, but White doesn't need to. And this knight is not in play. He's not. Let's just go back. He's not covering any key squares. If the knight goes to e7, at least a few things are covered here. The pawn on f5, just in case it should somehow hang. We're still supporting the d5 push, which we need to do at some point. And the knight can remaneuver in other ways. Anyway, let's just get to the game and go on. Knight b6, and now bishop b7. And here, I think White just continues on. I think Black just panics and is afraid of an illusion that he doesn't see. Oh, but I've noticed here he's been taking his time. Let me just back up and see. He's finally realized, I've got some trouble here. But I didn't like queen e8, and he spent 12 minutes on it. I didn't like, but he kind of rushed here a little quick. Now I stop and spend some time here. And this is where he panicked. And really, you don't want to play a move like that necessarily walking into discoveries, but I was looking at this, and White doesn't really have any useful discoveries. If he plays knight b5, then, on the rook, well, just take it. Take the knight. We're going to get 2 pieces for the rook, and we've killed off much of the White attack, right? And we still have this problem over here to deal with, but they'll find a way out eventually, and Black's okay here. Probably a little. If he can survive, he's got some winning chances here. Okay, so Black just kind of panicked here. Rook e5 needed to be played, and White doesn't have enough after that. I don't think. Well, he's got development. It's still White's thing, but White doesn't have a demonstrative win here. He can just continue with his plan, but he's not winning. He can overprotect, help overprotect d2 a little bit, get ready to double rooks. Right? He can do that. He could even play bishop f3 and secure e2. There's all kinds of good candidate moves, and that's beyond the scope of this. Let's just show what happens. Black just gave up the exchange, said go ahead and take it, and he did that after about 4 minutes thought. So he still had time on the clock. He could have spent a little more time. It's just, when you're giving up material like this, you still have a bad game. You're just saying I'm losing. So sometimes you just have to tell the other side, prove what you have. Make White find a winning plan. All you have to do is see that there's no immediate discovery, and then you can play it. And if you don't see anything else, then try it. If you do see something else, double check it. Maybe you're wrong. And I don't see it for White in there, other than just to continue with some of the plans I gave. But this just gives up the game. Black just falls apart here, and here he plays just bad move. I guess it just leads to immediate defeat. But if you take with the queen, Black's still losing. He hasn't moved any of his queenside pieces other than his queen. It's now moved 4 times. Went to e8 and or 3 times, e8, f7, and so forth. Anyway, moving on to the main line, he took on e6, and that just allowed this check, and that's deadly. White's winning the queen for a rook. There's basically no choice here. So all the problem came from Black just kind of playing around in the opening and not paying attention and figuring he can get d5 anyway, in at any time he wanted, and he couldn't. And then White brilliantly came up with 7d5. So great game by White. Better luck next time, VA Knight. I thank you all for taking time to look at this. Don't forget, look at Truxton's video. It's linked in the description, and I'll be back soon with another one for you. Take care. Bye.